ahead. So this is an international, multi and intersensory and intergenerational conference. And I really want to emphasize that. There are lots of established sensory studies scholars here, lots of stars, but there are also those of you whom we hail as next generation sensory studies scholars, the MA students, the PhD students, the postdocs. You are the rising stars, and may you burn bright and never burn out. But let me warn you, okay, there's a real risk of burnout in this line of business, okay? Sensory overload happens to the best of us all the time. So we've got to guard against it. And actually, we have a cure for sensory overload. It's going to be happening tonight at the Insipid banquet, okay? So just hang on and we will prepare you for what's coming, okay? And you won't experience sensory overload, I can assure you. Well, look, let's get started with what we're actually supposed to be discussing. What I'd like to do is sort of give you a couple of definitions so that we orient ourselves and then move into the body of the talk. Some definitions, okay? The sensorium, okay? Let's not talk about the five senses, okay? It's grossly misleading, that notion. Let's follow Walter Ong, who defined the sensorium as the entire sensory apparatus as an operational complex. Differences in culture, he suggests, can be thought of as differences in the sensorium, the organization of which is partly determined by culture, while at the same time it makes culture. So this is the interface between culture and biology, between so many things that is the focus of our inquiry into the sensorium. How do you study the sensorium? Well, the best sort of suggestion, the best framework from within anthropology is a definition advanced by François Laplantine in The Life of the Senses. The experience of ethnographic fieldwork is an experience of sharing in the sensible, le partage du sensible. We observe, we listen, we speak with others, we partake of their cuisine, we try to feel along with them what they experience, and together with them make sense of that experience. So there you have sort of a definition of the sensorium, which is the object of study, and the way in which to approach it. And I really find this a bit difficult. There we go. Next, okay, I'd like to talk about disciplining the senses, the way in which a series of disciplines in the social sciences and humanities converged on the sensorium, beginning right around 1990. So you have in that time, the emergence of an anthropology of the senses, a history of the senses, a sociology of the senses, and a geography of the senses. And each of those sort of represented an incursion on psychology, because for the longest while, psychology had the last word, okay? The professionals, when it comes to studying the senses and perception, were the psychologists. Now, psychologists think they can study the senses in laboratories, and they think they can make representative claims about how human perception works when the subjects that they use as research subjects are all weird. They are all Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic subjects. That's the only people psychologists draw on because they're cheap, okay? Students are cheap. You can get them to run all kinds of experiments like the mice that they otherwise used. And psychologists presume to tell us things about the senses based on this very small and unrepresentative sample and all of the assumptions that they bring with them as bourgeois gentilhomme. Okay? So what we do in anthropology is we seek to get out of the laboratory. Okay, we want to liberate the senses from the laboratory and investigate them in everyday life. And these are a couple of milestones. I'm not going to go into them in depth, but this is, sort of what you see happening in anthropology around the sensory turn. First of all, you have to go back to the 1970s, a very famous book by Clifford Geertz called The Interpretation of Cultures, which sort of suggests an interpretive paradigm. And Geertz said, the culture of a people is an ensemble of texts which the anthropologist strains to read over the shoulders of those to whom they properly belong. Okay, so, anthropology is a process of reading culture. Then a decade later, you have a very influential book being published called Writing Culture. Every graduate student in anthropology has been through it. And it's about the poetics and politics of ethnography, and it questions a lot of the assumptions that undergirded Geertz's perspective. But look at the strange thing that's going on the cover of this book. You have Stephen Tyler in the field. Now, actually, his posture is not correct, because remember with Geertz, the anthropologist reads over the shoulders of the people. Well, no, here, Tyler has got his back turned to them, and they're obviously quite bored, and they're looking over his shoulder. Okay? So basically, what had happened is that the model of the text, the model of reading culture and then writing culture, had resulted in anthropology imploding. It had gotten swallowed up by the model of the text, cut off from the very people that it was concerned formerly with studying. Along comes Paul Stoller, who writes The Taste of Ethnographic Things in 1989. And that's a very different approach. Stoller, puts the senses into anthropology and is not so concerned with interpretation, really trying to grapple with sensation. And so too with the publication in 2023 of the Routledge International Handbook of Sensory Ethnography, a massive tome which really shows you how sensory ethnography has come of age. Look at history. Okay? How has the sensory turn unfolded in history? This will be a familiar figure to many of you. It's Marshall McLuhan. And he has a media map of history, which starts with oral cultures, where the ear is dominant, goes through the invention of the phonetic alphabet. So the eye is substituted for the ear. There's a greater intensification with the printing press and movable, repeatable type. And then you have the invention of the telegraph, and that actually sort of brings hearing and touch back in. Now, this is a very, very powerful framework. And I just have to say that, it was McLuhan who got me hooked on the senses. I went to a talk he gave at Trinity College in 1979, where he was setting out the laws of media that you see here. And it absolutely captivated my attention. Most importantly, it saved me from Merleau-Ponty. Okay, because all of the people that I was going through my program with were reading the phenomenology of perception in preparation for their field work, okay? And that is the worst imaginable preparation because, for phenomenologists, it's all about you, right? It's all about me, sorry, it's not about you, it's about me, okay? And Merleau-Ponty furthermore has the idea of a unity of the senses. What McLuhan taught us is about the kaleidoscopic sensorium, the clash of the senses. And we should be paying just as much attention to the clash of the senses as to their unison. But if you read Merleau-Ponty, you're not going to get any of that. See, so I'm so thankful to Marshall McLuhan for shielding me from the unfortunate influence of Merleau-Ponty. In terms of history, one very sort of important author is Constance Classen. And her methodology for doing the cultural history of the senses is one that involves sensing between the lines, okay? Not reading between the lines, but sensing between the lines. And in the example of her book, Inca Cosmology and the Human Body, she actually senses between the lines of the Spanish chronicles, which were laced with racist stereotypes, to reconstruct the sensory order of the Inca Empire. In two chapters in this book, Empire of the Senses, one called McLuhan in the Rainforest, the sensory orders of oral cultures, she gives us an essential corrective to McLuhan. He lumped all oral cultures together, but in fact, there are as many differences to the orchestration of the senses between oral cultures as there are between oral cultures and literate cultures. Okay? There is a tremendous diversity using sensory ethnography. You can begin to tap into those. Her other chapter in Empire of the Senses was called The Witch's Senses, Sensory Ideologies and Transgressive Femininities from the Renaissance to Modernity. Sort of a wonderful exploration of the witch and how the witch's senses fascinated and perturbed men, especially during this period, and all of the ways in which women transgressed the bounds that were dictated by men. Cultural History of the Senses is 6 volumes. Each volume has 10 chapters. That means she's the general editor of that, and 60 scholars you had to marshal to pull off an investigation of this nature. I strongly recommend that you read the books in the Cultural History of the Senses in order to actually know where you are coming from when you do a study in history or when you do a study in anthropology. Don't read The Phenomenology of Perception. It won't help you, but if you actually acquire a historical sense, then you'll be able to pick up on things that you wouldn't have perceived otherwise. Now, the next thing is another way of dividing the sensorium. I've talked a little bit about how all these different disciplines, converge on the sensorium and sort of steal the thunder and also territory from psychology. But another way of dividing the sensorium is in terms of these fields, these interdisciplinary fields, which will be very familiar to you: visual culture, auditory culture, or sound studies, smell culture, taste cultures, and so on. And so, here, all of these different divisions of the sensorium by sense, but approach from a multidisciplinary angle instead of a unidisciplinary one, come under the umbrella term of sensory studies. And this is a term coined by Michael Bull and the rest of us in 2006. And I want to actually sort of now get to talking about that journal that Michael and I are associated with. In what follows, I want to offer an insider account of the genesis of this journal and an overview of the development of the interdisciplinary field of sensory studies from 2006 to 2026. Okay, so actually this is a first draft of an article that we will be publishing in the first issue of the volume next year, 2026. I was the editor of the sensory formation series from Berg, and Michael was the co-editor of the first volume in that series, a book called The Auditory Culture Reader that came out in 2003. And it was our publisher, the visionary Catherine Earle, who suggested that we start a journal. So Michael called on Paul Gilroy, and I called on Doug Kahn to join us, and they agreed. That's Paul Gilroy, the author of Black Atlantic and Post-Colonial Melancholia. Paul Gilroy. I remember sitting in this restaurant booth right next to Paul Gilroy as we talked about how we might imagine this journal. It was a tremendously inspiring experience. Who is Michael Bull? Well, before enrolling for a PhD in sociology at Goldsmith, he organized jazz festivals and weekend concerts in and around Covent Garden for about 6 years. Very cool. Very, very cool. He rocketed to fame on account of his studies of the Walkman and the iPod. Indeed, all media would converge on Michael for commentary. He became the authority known as Dr. iPod as a result of bringing this cultural studies informed approach to the analysis of this device. He is a prolific scholar, extraordinary, the number of books that he has edited and that he is writing. But he is not with us tonight, and I just want to explain why. Earlier this year, he decided to retire. And wrapping things up when you are as productive a scholar as he has been is very difficult and time consuming. So when he bowed out of being here, he wrote to me saying, I never liked the word retiring. I'm going to try and speed up. And I'm sure he will, because he's just that kind of person. But anyway, he has to wind down all of these, associations that he's got going. Secondly, his book is way overdue. Sonic Experience of World War I, Fragments, Traces, Variation. Bloomsbury, who've got him under contract, are asking, when is this manuscript going to arrive? So he had to dedicate his attention to that. And also, because he's the managing editor of the Senses and Society, we alternate. He has to deal with the crisis of one of the special issues that was supposed to be even at the publisher on April 15th, not being done yet. And, working with editors who are irresponsible like that is really, really difficult. So that takes time. Now, this special issue is actually edited by me. And Abu Farman, okay? And, Abu will be here, but we shouldn't be. Michael should be here. We should be at our desks wrapping up the issue. But that's, Michael, a wonderful sacrifice. He promised he would come to Concordia in the coming year. So we let him off the hook for this. I'm just sorry he couldn't be here to be with you. Senses and Society, okay, where does that come from? Well, obviously, playing off Body and Society, a very well-established journal, a very well-respected journal. So we wanted to draw a little bit of its draw, to ourselves. But what were we going to call this, this area that we were just developing? Okay, how are we going to define our method? Sensography? No. Okay. And we experimented with a number of different expressions until we came up with sensory studies. Okay. Sensory studies, cultural studies, it has a distinct resonance. And we thought, okay, this is going to work. But actually, we didn't come up with it. We stole it. We stole it from there was already in existence a journal of sensory studies at that time, and it was run by the Society of Sensory Professionals. What is a sensory professional? Do any of you consider yourself to be a sensory professional? Well, they used to be called organolepticians, and that's because they are concerned with the senses of smell and taste. And they're all those chemists in white coats in laboratories who are, sort of seeking to analyze the composition of foods and design them so we will like them. And in that regard, we took the name from them. We took it. And you're allowed to do that, okay? With a book covers, book titles, it's allowed. Not many people do, but you're allowed. There's nothing wrong with that. I want to emphasize, okay? I don't have a guilty conscience about doing this. In fact, I kind of chuckle every once in a while when I think, if they Google sensory studies, these chemists, okay, what do they come up with? They come up with all of our stuff, okay? They have to go pages and pages down until they get to what they think of as being sensory studies. So I laugh to myself until this happened 10 days ago. We were invaded, okay, by our website. If you went on it, you wouldn't see our website. You saw sensorystudies.org, okay? And this is neuroscientists and occupational therapists with an interest in autism who also have a very deep interest in getting sensorystudies.org for themselves. Okay, so they had gone in, they had, sort of stolen this, because actually in cyberspace, it's not the same. In cyberspace, you own a domain name. There have been problems with the credit card, but we got it back. Okay? Thanks to Jonathan, who's here. Within 3 hours, he had sorted this and we were back. Okay, but imagine, you would not have been able to find the website that you had been using on for all the information about this, this conference during that brief moment when it was occupied, occupied by this alien force of neuroscientists and occupational therapists. Now, I want to emphasize that well, maybe I can. What I can do is very briefly, give you a concrete example of just how it is that sensory studies approaches, as in ethnography, differs from the sensory science approach. But actually, you know what? Looking at the time, yes, I think I can. I'm going to do this. I'm going to go for it. Okay, this is what sensory professionals do. Okay, this is a book called Sensory Evaluation Techniques. It's about the methods of sensory science, and here you get an inside view of a sensory evaluation laboratory. As you can see, there are all these cubicles. And as you can see, the panelists, or the people who are being the research subjects, are assigned to these cubicles. They're isolated from each other. And in fact, they're not supposed to say a thing, okay, because the people who are conducting this research don't want any interference. Okay, so they mustn't talk to each other. They mustn't go, or anything like that, because that might throw somebody else off. Meanwhile, they have to wear ear defenders sometimes, nose clips at others, blindfolds, because they want to analyze each of the sensory properties of a product one sensation at a time. And then they're all tabulated and a statistical profile of the ideal product is generated. Most importantly, according to the methodology of the sensory scientists, is that you have to be spontaneous. Okay, they want you to be the first thing that pops into your mind. Okay, and you record that judgment. Okay, so you've got people standing over you. Be spontaneous. I'm trying. Be spontaneous. And you can imagine the tension. I have a lot of admiration for the people that subject themselves to this kind of torture in the interests of science, okay, in the interests of arriving at a portrait of these materials. Now, you have discrimination tests, you have hedonic tests, and so forth that are used by these sensory scientists. Okay, you don't have a semantic test. I want to come back to that in just a moment. Okay, so this is how we do our research. Okay, with a friend of mine, Jean-Sébastien Marcoux, who was an anthropologist. He studied under Danny Miller at UCL in the material culture program, and he was hired by the Department of Marketing at the Hôtel des Hautes Études Commerciales. He and I had some contracts for a while. This is a long time ago, 1997, with a very prominent Montreal advertising firm. Okay? We were hiring ourselves out as anthropologists. And this firm had the Corona account, and interesting beer. Only 17% of women drink beer at least once a week, compared to 53% of men. Okay? So there's a real disparity there. But 38% of women drink Corona, compared to 62% of men. And in December 2024, which is quite recent, Labatt Brewery announced that its 5 top performing beers were Corona, Budweiser, Modelo, and Michelin. Okay, so a lot of Corona's success, or share of the market, is due to the disproportionate number of women who drink it, and also to the fact that it's the #1 selling import beer in Quebec. So why is it so popular, and why is it so appealing to women? Because this is the secret of its success. So, were Jean-Sébastien and myself, going to go into one of these labs, okay, and do our studies that way? No way. Okay? We went on a pub crawl. Okay, and I highly commend, the pub crawl as a way of doing ethnographic research. What we were in search of was the native's point of view, as anthropologists put it. And what we did was we focused on the qualia, the sensory properties of the product. But we did so ethnographically instead of, I don't know, they probably call it scientifically. I don't believe it. And so, what was it about Corona, okay, compared to, say, this, Molson Canadian? What was it about the sensory qualities of these products that differentiated them and accounted for Corona's success? Well, first of all, we had one hypothesis. Was it because Quebecers first encountered Corona when they were on vacation in Mexico and wanted to put some Mexican sunshine in their lives when back in Montreal that they went for it? But that didn't pan out. Was it because of the ritual? As you know, Corona comes with a little twist of lime. And so you don't just drink it. There's always a ritual involved. We thought that was pretty cool and pretty important. And as anthropologists, we're into ritual. But what we found, actually, in order to sort of understand what's been called the gender pint gap, was that what was most informative, was actually looking at the way in which the beers were perceived. Now, Molson Canadian, okay, man's beer, a man's beer. And we found that when men who drink Molson Canadian talk about it, they would say it's very filling and pat their bellies. This is known as the Molson muscle. Okay, so it was the full quality, the full-bodied quality, and actually, the rich golden color of Molson Canadian, amplified that. Compare, Corona. And the interesting thing about Corona is a tall, slim bottle instead of a dark, stubby one. And it's the color of sunshine, not a golden kind of color. And when women talked about it, who drank it, they would say, that they found it very fine. And they would go like this. They wouldn't pat their bellies. They would go like this. So it was the finesse, it was the fineness of the experience of Corona. And they considered it to be a light beer. Now, it's not a light beer. It has higher alcohol content than Guinness. So anybody who is drinking it thinking it's a light beer is going to get hammered without realizing why. And so what was interesting is that this was consumer added value. It was the interpretation that people were putting on this beer, seeing it as light, okay, that actually was accounting for its popularity. And you're never going to get at that in one of those sensory evaluation labs. I rest my case. Now, I wanted to get into this, the modern family, and how you can see the senses through a photograph using this idea of sensing between the lines, but we don't have time. Let me comment briefly on this. I'm just trying to give you different models by which you can sort of imagine this idea of the sensory model. And here, it's a very interesting one. It's that of, first of all, Wilder Penfield's wonderful experiments. And Mark Patterson has a wonderful book, How We Became Sensory Motor, in which he talks about, what Penfield was on about, this neurosurgeon here in Montreal, who would open the skulls of these epilepsy patients and brush them and find out in that way the brain's map of the body. And they were conscious and they would tell when he touched them here or there, different experiences that they had. Absolutely fascinating. And in this way, he arrived at this understanding of how the body is mapped on the brain. And you can see that, the cortical magnification is different from the anatomical proportions. You have both a 2D and a 3D image here. You see how big the mouth is, how big the hands are, because of all the sensors that go to the brain from those areas. Now, the star-nosed mole is another famous example of this. Here you have a number of different moles, and the star-nosed mole, which you see at the bottom, not a very attractive creature, admittedly, okay, is really quite interesting because moles, of course, generally have small eyes and a tiny optic nerve, and they are functionally blind, essentially, but they have 25,000 receptors in these touch organs, these wriggly fingers that protrude from their nasal area. And the star-nosed mole can actually decide whether something is edible or not in 8 milliseconds, which is faster than any other animal, in effect. And what's interesting is that, like the saccadic movement of the eyes, that's what these feelers are doing. And so there's an extraordinary representation of touch in the case of the star-nosed mole. And, again, the idea here is that, well, maybe we can use this as a model to think of different cultures as, paying attention in different proportions to different senses. Maybe we can use this as a way of thinking. It's a bit too mechanistic a way of thinking, but that was part of what inspired us, to begin with. One of the things was that at the last Uncommon Senses, we used sensory ecology in the title. And we got all these applications from biologists. And initially, we were going to write to them and say, this is not your kind of conference, okay? This is a cultural studies conference. You know, what do you want to come to us for? But we didn't. They came, okay? And let me tell you, colorful jumping spiders are the most amazing thing. I had long been a cultural constructionist, okay? I was only concerned with a cultural account of the senses. Now, I'm not going to become a biologist, but I was absolutely fascinated by what these researchers in sensory ecology were understanding. And it's completely expanded my mind and a number of anthropologists' minds, the idea of a multi-species anthropology that comes out of that to begin to map these other ways of sensing. Okay, I'm going to skip this and this. I'll come back to it later, but this is the way to do sensory ethnography, this painting by Remedios Varo. I'd like to talk instead about the development of this interdisciplinary field of sensory studies since 2006. It really is quite extraordinary how sensory studies has taken off during this period. You have the Sensory Formations book series from Berg, which was sold to Bloomsbury, which was sold to Routledge. But it's okay, we're doing great at Routledge. It was a good move. You have the Sensory Studies series, which is offered now, first of all by Bloomsbury, but now is based with Routledge. You have Mark Smith's series, Studies in Sensory History at University of Illinois Press, but that has now moved and become Perspectives on Sensory History. You have Cambridge University Press, Elements and Histories of Emotions and the Senses. You have the Westminster Law and Senses series. You have Univers sensoriel et sciences sociales by Marie-Luce Guélard. And you have another sort of series that's just come on, Environment, Senses, and Emotions. Okay? So there's been this extraordinary expansion and development of sensory studies that's reflected in all these different book series, and there are more. These are just the ones I'm going to focus on. There are also, an increasing number of journals. The Senses in Society, around since 2006. One of its latest special issues is Senses and Spaces of Modern Healthcare. Its next issue, if it ever gets finished, is called Multisensory Ethnography and Synesthetics by Abu Farman and myself. You have Multimodality in Society, which is directed by Carrie Jewett at the Knowledge Lab at University College London. It has had multimodality and museums was one special issue. Another one was race and multimodality, edited by Sachi Sakimoto and Chris Brown. Sachi is with us. There is Sensate, a journal for experiments in critical media practice. That's out of the Sensory Ethnography Lab, basically, at Harvard. There's Alabastron, which just came on. Institute for Art and Olfaction is behind it. There's Ambiences, an international journal of sensory environment, architecture, and urban space. And, Ambiences actually grew out of Cresson, which was a research group concerned with sound and listening at the University of Grenoble, but it gradually morphed into this study of sensory environments. And you have the Journal of Sensory Studies. Actually, no, it doesn't belong there, okay? It doesn't belong there. It's not in the domain that we are calling sensory studies. You have all these research centers and labs as well, which really show you just how international this is. You have the Groupe de Recherche Culture Sensible at Liège, the Amsterdam Center for Cross-Disciplinary Emotion, a group at Mar del Plata. You have the Senses and Society thematic group of the International Sociological Association. You have the Senses and Sensation Research Group, and the people from Bristol are here in force as well. You have the Multisensory Studio at the University of Calgary, and Kathleen Sitter, who directs that studio, is also here. And you have the Embodied Design Research Laboratory at UC Berkeley. And it's very interesting. It consists of mathematics, and they have a reading group. It meets every Tuesday afternoon called the Embodied Underground. very Californian, okay, velvet underground, embodied underground, absolutely fascinating to mix with these people in mathematics who are looking at rendering mathematics sensible, and all of the improvements, excuse me, in terms of what elementary school students can achieve with that. This is the sensory studies website, the one that we got back. Okay, we almost lost it, but we got it back. Great place to go to find out about events of note and books of note. And let me draw your attention to the research directory. There are 700 entries in that directory, and you're going to be receiving an email inviting you to consider submitting an entry for the directory. It's addressed, both to established scholars and to next generation scholars. And I strongly encourage you, if you find that actually, your passion for sensory studies, grows as a result of the exposure to all the other people that you'll meet here, to consider submitting an entry. Okay, we're at 700 now, and it just keeps growing. We don't charge fees, okay, and we're not an association, we're just a network. And that's much more flexible, much more interesting than becoming the American Anthropological Association or whatever. The senses in society. I'm not going to go over our objectives. You can read those in the opening page. But what I am going to do is, sort of address that question. Actually, I had a whole series of slides. No, not there yet. Yeah, okay. I lost all of my slides on the most cited article, the most read article, and so on. It's deeply distressing because okay, but I can reconstruct it from my notes. Okay, so one thing that would be interesting to do is that journals are very concerned to gather statistics about themselves. Okay, and so they have the ratings for a journal and this kind of thing very prominently on their website, and so and they also have most read articles of all time. So what first place goes to Introduction to Sensory Museology. And who is that by? It's by me. Okay. And that's not surprising. It's my journal, right? Not surprising at all that I would have the most read article, but actually it's not just mine. But it just points to how, that special issue on sensory museology really struck a chord. It's been amazing, the response to it. The next most read, Synesthesia, Transformation and Synthesis, a multisensory pedagogy of the image by Silvia Cassini, who's at the University of Aberdeen. Very interesting article, bringing out this idea of synesthesia, which is so captive of many imaginations these days. Next, at number 3, is Engaging the Senses in Ethnographic Practice, and that's by Sarah Pink, and I bet you all know Sarah Pink. She is an extraordinary force within the field of sensory studies. She wrote a book ages ago called Doing Sensory Ethnography. Now, most cited articles of all time. Okay, interestingly, at the top of the list, there is The Senses in Language and Culture, a book by these linguists, okay, who took a very unusual approach to the study of language by looking at how the senses are represented, not just color vocabularies, but in a far richer kind of way. And that's Asifa Majid, who's in the experimental psychology department at Oxford, and also Stephen Levinson. Next comes Introducing Sensory Studies, and this is the article that Michael and I and Paul and Doug wrote back in 2006. It launched the sensorial revolution, as it were. Then comes The Sensory Fabric of Urban Ambiences, and that article is by Jean-Paul Thibault, formerly of the University of Grenoble. He's retired now, and he founded the International Ambiences Network, okay, a very important organizer of that whole field known as ambiences. Next, Sound Studies Meets Deaf Studies by Michelle Friedner and Stefan Helmreich. Now that is an unlikely pairing sound studies and deaf studies. And for that very reason, it is tremendously revealing, a tremendously important article, a clitoroscopic article. McLuhan would have loved it. Really, really interesting for the things it opens up. Now, at number 5, there is the article Rethinking the Soundscape by Ari Kelman. And I wish it weren't there. I wish it were not in 5th place. I was the managing editor at the time Ari submitted it, and I had to hold my nose and block my ears the whole time it was going through the review process. Ari dared to criticize R. Murray Schafer. Can you believe it? Okay, R. Murray Schafer, who gave us the idea of the soundscape, who gave us acoustic ecology. Ari had the audacity to say we need to rethink this concept. Okay, so I wouldn't have published it, but I bowed to the peer reviewers, and it got in. And now it's at number 5. Okay, I feel that I betrayed R. Murray Schafer. He was here one year. His end of year project involved these students from theater and music and dance, all composing a theater of the senses. It was an extraordinary night when we went to a place called the Parisian Factory and took in the theater of the senses that he proposed. So I felt that I had betrayed him, but again, you have to bow to peer review. But let me just say something about peer review. The biggest hassle writing, or rather editing a journal, is finding peer reviewers and then actually getting them to hand in their peer reviews. You would not imagine how much of a hassle it is. And you know what? We're thinking of going over to AI. Okay, we'll just give the whole process of evaluating articles to AI. Okay, if you people are not going to do it, if you humans are not going to do it, then the only recourse that we have. Now, I'm horrified by that idea, but I just want to say, if you ever get an invitation to review an article for Senses and Society, just do it. Okay, otherwise it's over for us humans. Okay, all the articles can be written by AI and they can be reviewed by AI, and we'll just stand idly in the background. Okay, those are the stakes. When you get an invitation to peer review, remember you're one of the last, human beings out there, okay, who's still doing that, because most human beings are not bothering. Most of your colleagues are not bothering, but I shouldn't complain. Now, I have gone through a great many things. One of the things that we promised was that there would be something for each of the senses. And, has the journal delivered on that? It's a very interesting question. And actually, I'm not going to go through and do an analysis of all the articles in the journal. I just want to look at how the senses are represented here now. Okay? And what you find, you see the standard hierarchy: sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch on one side. And then you've got the actual number of sessions on each of these. Look at that. Touch reigns supreme. Okay. The conventional order of the senses has been overturned by you people, okay? You revolutionaries, you've turned the hierarchy upside down, and there are more sessions on touch than any other sense. There's also a very interesting session at InnovoBot exploring haptics that is on tomorrow evening, which you should think about maybe going to. Smell comes next. Smell is very well represented at this conference. And next comes hearing, and then sight, but only if you include people who are studying blindness. You have Gilly Hammer, you have John Lee Clark, and their work on blindness is extraordinary and will completely transform your understanding of sight. And then taste. Okay, taste comes in at the bottom. But there are also all these emergent areas, okay? Actually, most of the sessions are multi or intersensorial. So I've given a kind of infinity loop for that. Okay, most of you, are not abiding by the bounds of sense. Okay, the 5-sense sensorium, you're looking at all these crossovers. The insensible and intangible. Interestingly, there are 5 panels session on that. Animal and plant sensing, we have sessions on that. Intimate and remote sensing, we have sessions on that. And we have queering the senses. I'm very proud of that. And it's Mark Lipton. I don't know if Mark is here yet. He might not be arriving till tomorrow. He has been at every uncommon senses there is. And we're at number 5 now. He deserves a medal. Okay, and his enthusiasm and his efforts to queer the senses deserve recognition. Okay, I have a bunch more things that I want to say, that I need to say. I want to talk about, the experiment in dining that we are going to be enjoying tonight. I also want to give you a bit more sensory history of Quebec. And so I have those things on my agenda, but I'm going to stop right now and open the floor for questions. Any questions that you might have about this sort of tracing of the history of this notion of sensory studies and the history of a movement that has gone in this very interesting way. I'm going to ask you to come to the microphone if you would. Okay, so.
Sorry, do you need it? Because we have people online.
Okay, yes, all the people online. So please, if you would come to the microphones, that would be great. Okay, please.
Thank you. I would like to know if when you see your work exposed, do you feel like traveling time to the moment you did it? Yeah, like going back in the moment that you draw, you painted that.
Well, I thought you were talking about my experience with David. We're double Davids, and we're in this infinite spiral loop of time and place. We keep intersecting. I try to get away, but the gravitational pull pulls us together again. I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, I wasn't expecting that answer, for sure. Thank you.
What I can say about David's paintings, they have an extraordinary force as a result of the juxtapositions they stage. And they are called Métis still lifes. And they're still lifes in a way that goes way beyond those Dutch still lifes, which are called nature morte. That's the French translation of still life. David's still lifes are living in very interesting ways, very profound. Now, one of David's paintings is in the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts, but this touring exhibition is especially stunning in terms of the way it's going to make your understanding of the world be subject to all kinds of collisions. Any other questions? I can ask my own question, okay? Well, has it been easy? Okay. Has it, this steady march forward of sensory studies that you've described, one step after another, this wonderful success story? Has it been, a highway? No. Okay. And there have been numerous setbacks along the way. One very serious one could have been when we got raided, okay, by sensorystudies.org, when those neuroscientists, those nasty neuroscientists invaded our space, okay? But actually, there have been other confrontations as well. And I think especially to, the fact that back in 2000, Tim Ingold, who's probably the most prominent anthropologist out there right now, Tim Ingold, in a book called The Perception of the Environment, took the trouble to trash a book that I had edited 10 years earlier called The Varieties of Sensory Experience. Okay, he just cut it to pieces. And most people only ever read Tim Ingold, so they don't read what I was writing. They don't realize that he's created a straw man here and then cut it up. And that's easy for him to do. So actually, a lot of people think of Tim Ingold as being one of the foremost theorists of the senses, which is just not true. Okay, just not true. And there are all kinds of reasons for that. But one of the things that I found interesting recently was that I was writing a book called The Sensory Studies Manifesto. I knew that, what I wanted to say was the opposite of everything that Tim Ingold said. And so I wrote an article on the side, which I entitled The Misperception of the Environment, in which I showed all the ways in which Ingold was wrong. Now, the Sensory Studies Manifesto is a very positive book. There's not a single critical word in it. It's just trying to articulate, what I consider us all to be engaged in. The misperception of the environment is very combative. But I want to emphasize that, you might think that, Tim Ingold and I are sworn enemies. But the last time he was in Montreal, he was here at the invitation of my colleagues at McGill. It was October, and so he and Anna and a scholar who was visiting from Finland, we went up Mount Royal, and I had brought along some coffee and some croissants. I mean, Ingold is an activity theorist. I couldn't just take him to a cafe. He can't sit. Okay, he's got to be on the move all the time. We had a wonderful conversation and avoided many of the topics that divide us. So we get along very well. Very well. But when we came down Brown Mountain, our paths parted, and we've been at loggerheads ever since. So I think David Lee Clark told me one time, you can judge a person by the quality of their enemies, not by their friends, by their enemies. And so I don't know if this is a good reflection on me or a bad. And I know that my students say, don't mention Ingold to him. He starts off, okay? But anyway, I just had to put that out there as well. Ingold, with that critique, put the anthropology of the senses back 20 years. We have been slowly climbing out of that hole, okay? And we're getting there. I'm very pleased with our progress, but it's taken a lot of effort, okay? So yes, some steps forward, and then you get thrown back. Okay, if there are no more questions, let me sort of go on, because I've still got a fair bit of material that I need to go through. That has to do with, with what we're going to try and do at the banquet tonight. It's not really a banquet, it's a cocktail, okay? It's not a banquet. We shouldn't have used that word. But I want to explore, what our objectives are there. Because as I said, this is an uncommon senses conference, okay? So, what we have tried to do is theme all of the experiences, okay? We're not just going to let this be an audio-visual kind of experience. So tonight, we themed it this way, okay? Tonight, at the insipid banquet, we are going to have Wonder Bread for you and some very anemic margarine. Okay. In addition to that, we will have premium plus soda crackers, unsalted. We will have popcorn, plain popcorn. It will be unsalted and unbuttered, and we will have celery, lots and lots of celery. Now, celery, it takes more energy to chew a stick of celery, okay, than you get from eating it. Okay, so it's a negative proposition, I'm told. We only made two concessions, two exceptions to eating white tonight. Blue spaghetti, it was so popular last time that we decided we had to bring it back, and wasabi peas. The thing about the wasabi peas is that you have to pick them up with chopsticks, okay? So I hope that you have the dexterity necessary, otherwise you're gonna have a very difficult time having any flavor to what you eat tonight at all. Now, fortunately, there's lots of white wine to wash it down with, okay? So we hope that that will make up for it. But, what I want to emphasize that is that, for many of you, including myself, this will be a chance to taste your own identity, okay? Eat white, not see yourself, but taste yourself. And maybe with apologies to Harmonium, I could just add a little bit to one of their songs. Pour un instant, j'ai retourné mon miroir. Okay? I turned my mirror around. J'ai mangé du pain blanc. Okay? I ate a slice of white bread. Ça m'a permis enfin de mieux me sentir, not de me voir, not to see myself, but to feel myself. Now, if you don't like what you taste tonight, that's okay. It will mean that you have been unsettled. And we were talking about being unsettled rather than settlers before. It will mean that you have been unsettled. And if you leave feeling hungry, that's okay too. Okay, that's okay because I hope that we crave more than whiteness, because whiteness doesn't have the greatest connotations here in Quebec. It calls to mind the expression "speak white." Lalonde, I'm missing her first name right now, in 1968, composed this poem, performed it, and it condemns the linguistic, cultural, and economic exploitation and oppression of French-speaking Canadians, especially the Quebecois, by the English language and by Anglo-American culture. So, basically, white is the language of public space. You can speak French in the privacy of your home, if you must, but not in my face, okay? Not in the face of the English boss, not in public. In English, you speak white. This was actually uttered in 1887 when, a French-Canadian member of the national legislature, was addressing fellow parliamentarians in French and was told, "Speak white." That, therefore, "speak white," has a really bad taste for a lot of people. And, prior to the Quiet Revolution of the 1960s in this province, you had les maîtres anglais, okay? And the English were the bosses in the factories, and they made up merchant class. French Canadians, some could become lawyers and notaries and physicians and even parliamentarians, but not captains of industry. Okay? Industry, commerce was under the exclusive control of the English. And it's in that regard that the most crucial development of the 1960s was the Quiet Revolution and the whole move to become maîtres chez nous, masters in our own house. That manifested in a huge hydroelectric project, the James Bay, and it also manifested in the bill, or law rather, 101. Okay, Law 101, which sought to turn the tables on the way in which English had been the dominant language and French had been consigned, to the privacy of the home. You have the establishment of the Office québécois de la langue française, the language police, okay? And they would go around enforcing the laws of Quebec regarding the way in which language was to be used on signs. Okay, and I'm just trying to find, in Quebec, as a result of Law 101, which is a product of the 70s and the Bourassa government, public signs and commercial advertising must generally be in French, although they can also be in French and another language. Okay, so you can have bilingual signs. The French version must be, quote, markedly predominant, meaning it has a much greater visual impact than any other language on the sign. This usually translates to French text being at least twice as large as the text in another language. Okay, so you're going to be tested on this on the last day. We're asking you to please try and figure out the language laws of Quebec by looking at all the signs. Okay, and I'm just going to give you a few pointers right now. Okay, that one right in the middle about the annual sale, perfect. Okay, the English is half the size of the French. Okay, perfect, perfect. Which of those two stop signs, there are three actually, which of those two stop signs is correct? Arrête, arrête, stop, stop, arrête, and then a word in Inuktitut. Okay, which one of those is correct? Well, I'm not going to tell you because you have to observe and figure it out because you're going to have that test on Saturday when you have to show what you've been able to understand about this language. The other thing, okay, besides size is apostrophes, okay? In French, there are no apostrophes. You have la compagnie de la baie d'Hudson. Okay, that is the Hudson's Bay Company in English. So, what do you do with that dangling apostrophe? Well, you bloody well eliminate it, okay? Because French doesn't have apostrophes, and the whole point of this is to promote and also preserve the French language in North America because it's so much under attack from all les Anglais. And so, you have here a very interesting way. What the Hudson's Bay Company did is he just gave up and said, okay, we're going to call ourselves the Bay or La Bay. Okay, we're going to get around all this, get rid of that bloody apostrophe by going in that route. But here you have, some more examples of, conforming or non-conforming uses to the signs. Bienvenue à Montréal. This is a tourist brochure. Welcome to Montreal, half the size. Excellent. L'été, David's tea. Okay. No apostrophe. It's okay. Okay, no apostrophe. It doesn't look right, but it's okay because there's no apostrophe. All vehicles stop. Isn't the English there twice the size of the French? Borders. They're Canada's jurisdiction, not Quebec. Okay, so the language laws of Quebec don't apply. Anyway, Amazon is even conforming to these laws. So, that situation where speak white was that crude insult. It's been changed, okay? It's been flipped, and it's really interesting. The language politics in this province. A lot of English people feel really hard done by, feel discriminated against, okay, by having to have their language half the size of the French. I think I would just say to them, shove it, okay? Just don't be so petty. I love having English put down. In fact, one of the problems that I have when my students write exams in French, I love the French language so much that their marks start creeping up. So I have to suppress them. Okay, I have to consciously, reduce the marks. Also, French is a much more florid language than English. So if you have 400 words, for an essay assignment in English, you're allowed 440 in French. Okay, so French students get away with more words as well. It's quite fascinating. But I'm not going to go any further into this phenomenon. What I want to just give you very briefly is that if you survive the insipid banquet, called that for a reason tonight, what do you have to look forward to? Okay, because we've said that we are going to have a gala banquet on the Friday. I don't want to make you salivate because first of all, you're going to have to, make it through the banquet tonight, but you will be served on Friday at the gala banquet. You will be served Quebec's national dish, its contribution to world cuisine. And if you don't know what that is, okay, then come on Friday and find out. Okay, you will truly taste Quebec on Friday. There will be colored popcorn, okay? Not just plain popcorn. There will be celery, but this time the celery will come with cheese whiz, okay? It will have that orange glow, okay, that is so dear to many, Canadians. And this is Kraft Cheese Whiz, okay, a Canadian company. So, this is what you have to look forward to. There will be pasta, but it won't be blue spaghetti, okay? More orange, okay? Kraft macaroni and cheese, okay? A staple, a Canadian staple. But most important of all, okay, is that there will be a ton of maple sugar products, okay? And I don't want to get you too excited, but these are little natural Canadian maple sugar. They're maple snaps. Okay? This is maple green tea, maple herbal tea. This is caramel à l'érable. This more of these candies. If you didn't get one, you can have one. These are planters peanuts au sirop d'érable. This is organic candies, du sirop d'érable. There are even sugar bush baked beans made with pure maple syrup. Okay, so you will come away from your experience on Friday, fou d'érable, crazy with all of the sugar in your system. And now this may lead you to wonder, why are these Quebecers so obsessed with maple sugar products? Okay, and why do they think that we would want them? Maybe some of you are not interested and will skip Friday's banquet because you just don't have that much of a taste for maple sugar products. Well, let me tell you, maple syrup is like gold to us. We consider maple syrup to be our oil. And as an expression of that, have you ever heard the story of the great Canadian maple syrup heist? Okay, probably not. Okay, you know about the Great Train Robbery and this kind of thing, but here in Canada, here in Quebec, it's the Great Canadian Maple Syrup Heist. Here there's a cartel, and the cartel controls collecting and then also distributing maple syrup. Okay, so you can only sell to the cartel if you're a producer, and they stockpile it, and then they let it out to keep the prices sound, just like an oil cartel. And this producteurs et productrices agricoles of Quebec have a strategic reserve of maple syrup into which everybody has to contribute. In 2008, what appears to have happened was that actually the contents of 9,571 barrels valued at $18.7 million had been stolen. How do you steal 9,571 barrels, big barrels of maple syrup? Well, this is a very sophisticated heist, only in Quebec. Okay, they went and in this reservoir, they would drain all the maple syrup out and put water back in. Okay, and then they went off and they went through Vermont and New Brunswick, and then they how do you fence it, right? They fenced all this illicit maple syrup there, and it was in such small batches that they weren't detected for a while. They were busted eventually, and one guy got 8 years in jail as a result. Okay, but the dream of stealing that much maple syrup, that's what drove him, what possessed him, and it's probably a dream of many Quebecois, sort of to have that much maple syrup. You could have your pool full of it and this kind of thing. So this is what drives us. This is what really animates us, and we want to try and kindle a similar passion in you, which is why we have all these maple syrup products for you to taste on Friday night. You can put maple syrup on everything, okay? Everything. I've been at sugaring off parties where that was what we did, okay? Poached egg, maple syrup, okay? Beans, maple syrup, everything. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say about it. Okay, but it's not just that, okay? It's not just, the mystique of this maple sugar heist, okay? One last thing that I just want to put on the table. There's also, other places have their Arab Spring, or what have you, okay? Here in Quebec, Maple Spring, le printemps d'érable, okay? If you want to get revolutionary in this province, then, it's got to be tinged with maple. This was a massive student protest. They were basically protesting a hike in tuition fees, and they went out and marched and marched and marched, and they beat pots and pans, and it was truly an extraordinary cacophony They did it all night, okay? And, you could never tell, the police could never tell where they would go next. So you had police helicopters with spotlights trying to track the movements of these hordes of students who were, sort of clanging pots and shouting, and, really protesting the tuition hikes, and also climate justice and all this kind of thing. They were really, very well mobilized. They were probably, a lot of them had a lot of maple syrup in their system because it was that time of the year. But look at that, all day and all night, they marched. Negoci. There was really an extraordinary movement, and it was so vital, so extraordinary to be a part of that time. So, even in our political life here in Quebec, it is through maple sugar that we fight, and that we, demand sort of equality and so forth. Okay, so this gives you a bit of background. Okay, I think that you'll be able to understand things a little bit better in this way, what you see going on around you. So I just want to close with two things. One is that we have a lot of thanks, and they are actually at the end of the Book of Abstracts. But I want to thank especially the graduate students who are the team that have enabled this to happen. You all know, if only via the internet, Craig Faircash, who is sitting right here. Extraordinary the number of hours he has put in responding to all of your queries, and he's getting paid for it. Okay, we don't believe in volunteers in this university. He's getting paid for it, but he had to sacrifice so much in terms of his thesis, other things in order to actually make this happen. So we are tremendously indebted to Craig. And if you have any issues, don't come to me. Go to him. Okay? Thanks, Craig. And then Lara, I don't know if Lara and Aurélie are here. They're actually probably setting up, okay, because they are preparing the banquet for you. I'm deeply indebted to them. They are the front of house. Craig is the backroom manager. They are the front of house. And also Ming Firon and Abigail Berg, they are the curators of the multisensory art gallery. Did an extraordinary job putting that together, because academics are difficult to organize, but artists are even worse. Okay, artists have so many particular demands, but we love you. Okay, we love you for all that you do to actually bring so much more to this conference. I'd like, however, to extend my sympathies to all the international students based at U.S. universities who could not be with us in person and can only participate online because it was just too risky for them to cross the US-Canada border. How can that be? How can that be? Such a disappointment to them, such a disappointment to us as well. For those of you who did make it, okay, for those of you who did make it here from the States, I want to say that you can talk about EDI all you want, okay? You can talk about it all the time because here it's protected by the Constitution, okay? The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms says in section 15.1, everyone is equal and has the right to equal protection and equal benefit of the law without discrimination, blah, blah, blah. Then, okay, section 15.2, this right, equal, the right to equality, does not preclude laws designed to ameliorate disadvantageous conditions that exist because of these factors. Okay, so a federal law that seeks through what's called affirmative action to ameliorate the condition of people that have been marginalized by these forms of discrimination, that's fine. It's got constitutional protection. Okay, so as Trump goes about dismantling and indeed banishing EDI from the states, you've got the opposite approach here. Also, for those of you who are visiting from the States, we have breakout rooms, okay? And these have padded soundproof walls, okay? And they are completely disconnected from the internet. Okay, so no messages from south of the border can interfere with you, and you can rage as much as you like. Okay, so these are special. We also have a hockey clinic for you. And I know you may think, well, what use is hockey, if you live in Florida and so forth. But actually, there are some techniques which are really good techniques. One is called elbows up. Okay, and elbows up, okay, is when you always have your elbows up when you are playing hockey. Okay, other people, the hip check is one way to stop an opponent, but the elbows up is far more effective. Okay, so in Canada, recently, because of the things that Trump has been saying, there was an expression going around, elbows up Canada. Okay, and we want to teach those of you who are here from the States this technique of elbows up, because you're going to need it when you go back to the States and have to face all those neocons. Okay, you are going to need to protect yourself. And we're just saying elbows up is a very good technique. This image went viral a few weeks ago, okay? It's a very interesting image, okay? The trade war between Canada and the US extends to birds as well. This is a case where the goose was alone, not part of a flock, which suggests that it was probably either very old or sick, and it was on this ice floe. And this American eagle thought, a nice plump Canadian goose, and was going to make a meal of it. And so the American eagle lands, okay, and the goose, and this is all captured on film, was so ferocious, even though it doesn't have anything like the actual deadly power of the American eagle, that the American eagle gave up and flew on. Okay? And so Canadians took heart from this. Okay, if we can just stand up long enough, this nightmare of the trade war that Trump has embroiled us in will be over. Now, see, I'm not going to the US anytime soon, so I can say these things, and I even have them written on my laptop. But just a warning to those of you who are visiting from the States, erase your laptop before you go back, okay, because otherwise you don't know what's going to happen at the border. Okay. This has been sort of a political history of the senses, as well as an overview of sensory history. Thank you for attending to it. And we will be actually, those of you who are brave enough, going upstairs for the insipid banquet in a few minutes' time. So actually, I will take, if you have any questions, there's a few minutes left. Whatever you make of this diatribe that I've subjected you to for the last while. Okay. Any questions? It's really hard to get a question in edgewise when somebody is, one of the things I should say is that, see, one of my latest books is a manifesto, the Sensory Studies Manifesto. I can only speak in slogans now. It's wonderful. It's wonderfully liberating. You should write a manifesto. Okay? You don't have to engage in reasoned arguments. You just come up with slogans. The senses are made, not given, and ones like that. It's really liberating. So write a manifesto, get it out of your system, but actually you'll be so addicted to it that you'll probably keep on writing. Please. And actually, I'm sorry, you're going to have to come down if you wouldn't mind. Thank you.
Hello, thank you very much for your talk tonight. My question is about the five senses, because you were saying they're quite limiting. So I was wondering if you can expand a little bit on the other conception of senses and how we can possibly go beyond the limitations of having these five senses. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's a very interesting question. We have it since Aristotle. There are five senses and no more. Aristotle also, however, talked about the common sense, which is impossible to square with his theory. It's not a sixth sense, but it is there. Very interesting. It has a wonderful history that has been explored in a book called The Inner Touch, archaeology of a sensation, an extraordinary work of intellectual history. So that's the first thing. But yes, this idea of a five-sense sensorium, the idea of five senses, it's a symbolic construct, okay? Just like, you've got the 7 days of the week, or the 3 ages of man, or the 4 seasons, or the 5 seasons, or what have you. It actually is as much concerned, to square with a cosmology as it is, an anatomical numeration. So there are lots of neuroscientists and so forth now who actually say there are many more than 5 senses, and they're right. Okay, they're right. Aristotle didn't really talk about proprioception or kinesthesia. Proprioception is the sense of the body in space. Kinesthesia of movement, and there are lots of actual senses that have popped up at times and then been suppressed. There's a wonderful play from the 1600s called Lingua, or the battle of the tongue and the 5 senses for supremacy. And it's a wonderful tale about, Lingua, who is female, wants to be counted among the senses. But the 5 senses say, no, there's only ever been 5. You're not wanted, and there's no room for you anyway. And they have a very lively debate, that is fascinating to contemplate. What we as anthropologists do, but also as historians, is we look at these different constructions of the sensorium. And we don't think that the neuroscientists should necessarily have the final word. They've traced various receptors, and they think that they can answer the question, how many senses there are in terms of neurology, in terms of neurobiology. But actually, there have been moments in Western history, and there are many instances across cultures, when you have very different enumerations. One especially fascinating period was the Scottish Enlightenment. And the Scottish philosophers, David Hume, and so forth, inventing senses right, left, and center. They invented the idea of a public sense and a common sense as we understand it, and also the sense of beauty, okay, and so forth. All these senses that have no basis in physiology whatsoever, but which they discerned as being senses. So as far as I'm concerned, the senses are innumerable, okay? The senses are innumerable, and really, the thing is, it depends on how you use them. There are lots of examples of senses that we might have, but that we've lost through not using them. One of those is the sense of direction, okay? Okay? How good is your sense of direction when you're relying on this all the time? This is actually a very old phone. It's not very smart, and therefore I have to rely on my own sense of direction when I go places. That often means that there are a lot of detours and this kind of thing, because I don't have an app telling me which way to go. But I pride myself on the fact that I've still got a sense of direction, whereas most people who are relying on these, maybe they don't have it anymore. Maybe that is a sense, and one though that can atrophy, that can disappear. There are lots of senses that we could and should be developing, and that's a fascinating story. So wonderful question, and really the 5-sense model has been out there for a long time, and it's still part of popular culture, but we need to get beyond it. But you know why we won't get beyond it? All those children's books on the 5 senses. Okay, if you look up books, 5 senses, okay, just like people who are in sensory studies who don't like the fact that we've occupied the field, if you look there are books and books and books, all these children's books on the 5 senses. Okay, first of all, that suggests senses are for children. What are you adults doing being interested in senses? Okay, senses are for kids. But secondly, it socializes them into thinking that they have 5 senses and the senses are discrete. One is called, you can't eat a pickle with your ear. Okay? Well, yes, okay, that's true. You can't eat a pickle with your ear, but why not? Okay, why not try? But children are discouraged, okay, from doing that. Synesthesia, no trace of synesthesia in any of those books. And so they're damping down the senses of children. We need to liberate the senses of children by burning all of those books, okay? Or else, books that will actually, teach them to experiment with their senses and discover, the varieties of sensory experience. Again, just put in books, 5 senses, page after page of kiddie books, kiddie literature on the senses, okay? You won't find our books until much, much further down. I'm not jealous, okay? I'm just saying that this is a problem. We should resist it, okay? We have to roll back this tide of children's literature on the senses.